As we begin this painting of avocados, we're going to look at preparing the colors. Our first colors we're going to be mixing up is for the avocado pulp. We're looking at midtones, highlights, and shadows. For the midtones, we're going to mix up yellow and white, highlights, yellow, and then twice as much white. And then for the shadows, yellow, burnt sienna, and black. We want all of these colors to be a cream consistency, meaning they're not really thin and you don't have a whole bunch of water with them. It needs to be thick so that you can control the paint more when you paint one layer on top of another. We'll have 3 different values for each section that we're talking about. You'll have that highlight, you'll have the midtone, and you'll have the shadow. Most of the time, the midtone, you're going to be doing a staining, which means you'll paint over the whole area with that specific color. And then you will look at the shadows where the shadows are, and then you'll put in the highlights last. The next section we're going to be mixing up paint for is the edge of the pulp, and this is mainly a green. So the midtones are yellow-green, the highlights are yellow-green and white, and the shadows are yellow-green and burnt sienna. Consistency should be the same. Consistency will be cream. Remembering as you're putting that brush into the paint to swirl it around many times so that you are capturing a lot of the paint onto your brush, and that allows you to make that thicker consistency a lot easier. Next section we're going to be working with is the avocado pit or the seed. The midtones are burnt sienna. The highlights are burnt sienna and white, and the shadows are burnt sienna and burnt umber. The final section we're going to mix up for is the avocado skin. Midtones are green, highlights are green, burnt umber, and yellow, and finally your shadow is green and burnt umber. One of the questions I always get is, how much paint should I mix up? Well, that's what this chart is for, is because you mix up your paint from each of the sections, and then you write down beside them exactly what colors you mix together, so that when you run out of that specific color, you can mix it up again. Probably in this specific painting we're doing, you're only going to need to mix up maybe once or twice. Something else to remember when you're using gouache, and specifically from the gouache tin that we have here, is rinse out your brush really good in between colors as you're mixing, and wipe it off on the side of your water so you don't have a whole bunch of water left in your brush. The brush really only needs to be damp as you're picking up the paint out of the tin. And here is our final chart for all of the sections. As we're preparing to sketch the subject, we'll make sure we have our Strathmore mixed media paper taped down and our HB or number 2 pencil. Looking at a resource photo, we want to duplicate the shapes. Just looking at the shapes. Do not draw any of the details. And you'll notice that I'm moving pretty quickly with my pencil. The lines are not nice and smooth. They are a little rough. And I can come back in with my kneaded eraser and erase what I don't need. Make sure you're doing a careful job with that, however, because you don't want to rough up the paper so that when you paint over the top of them, you can't see where you erased. Thinking about the basic shapes, thinking about, are there any basic details I want to make sure I include? For instance, the oval where the seed is, and also the oval where the seed was on the top. And then there is a little rough spot that goes from the seed down to the edge of the skin. I want to make sure to include those. Starting with my yellow mid-tone, I'm going to stain my first layer of paint. Now for the staining, I'm just trying to cover up the paper. I let my paint dry for a little bit, and then I'm ready to put on a second layer of the lighter yellow. Now the reason why I let it dry is so that when I put this on here, the two colors don't blend together. Now I'm mixing up the yellow green, and this yellow green, if you're looking at the avocado, the inside there is a green area right around where the outside of that skin is. Now we're going to do some dry brushing. Now the dry brushing helps it blend together so that the color that is there doesn't look like a stripe. I take my brush, rinse it out, dry it off really good, and then spreading it out so that the hairs on the brush are spread out some and it's dry. Going back and forth just a little bit, and that's going to help blend those two colors together. Spreading it out, brush is a little bit damp, and that way it's not a stripe. Now in your situation, if you like the way that stripe looks, there's nothing wrong with you leaving it a little bit more defined. Used a hairdryer a little bit to dry that out so I can get in and paint a little bit quicker. And now I'm working on the indentation on the avocado section on the top. Looking at my photo, I want to make sure I'm seeing where the shadow side would be and where it would be highlighted. Also using my dry brushing to get that in there. And then there's also some details I'm adding. I'm using that same darker color to build up the contrast. I'm painting with that white yellow again around where the seed and the impression would be. Once again using my dry brushing. Building up those layers as you're going so that you're going to be able to see each of those colors that we've put into this. The light yellows, the yellow greens, the dark yellow greens, the shadow colors. We should see each one of those. It's just going to make it richer. Now I'm getting into the seed, starting out with my burnt sienna, then building up a shadow on the side, burnt sienna and burnt umber. I even added a little bit of black to the burnt sienna and burnt umber so that I could show up even darker areas around the edge. using my burnt sienna and the white to make that highlight. And then there was a little bit of a highlight around the edge of that seed. Now painting in where the skin of the avocado is. With some of the photographs, you're going to see more of the skin, and you'll have to work with texture. In order to create the texture, what you're going to do is utilize, once again, all three colors, making sure not to mix them all together, but leave some of the lighter color showing, the base color showing, and the shadow showing. Right next to the seed and right next to the area that's the impression where the seed would go, there is a really bright highlight. So I'm putting that in with my yellow and double white. It also builds up the contrast. And then coming in with a darker color now, with that darker green, the green and the burnt umber, and building up a little bit of the texture, some of the details around the outside. Now, just as you do with watercolors, you can also use wet into wet with gouache. You'll notice I wet down the area, pretty wet, and then I also, instead of using a cream consistency, I used a tea consistency, but this consistency in this paint is dark. Spreading it out a little bit, then I'm taking my brush with just a tiny bit of paint on it and kind of showing, just darkening that gray around the outside, getting a texture there. And here is the finished painting.